So today I want to talk to you about the Inflation Reduction Act. It was passed in 2022. It is still the law of the land. There are probably a lot of questions about how much that law of the land is being respected right now. Granted, Trump has gone through a couple different pauses on grants and even sick the FBI after one of the programs in particular. The tax credits are going to be the main focus of what we're talking about today for homeowners. Those haven't really, no one's really gone after those yet, and they are still the law of the land. They will apply at least to the rest of this year, and they really can't change until Congress passes a law. They are currently negotiating a budget bill right now, but any homeowner credits I talked to you about today, I would expect to still be legitimate through at least the rest of this year. And I want to start off with just saying, what do you need to know about climate change? You only need to know 10 words. Scientists agree. It's real, it's us, it's bad, and there's hope. So what that means, yes, it's real. The globe is warming. We can see clearly in the temperature records and measure this in a number of ways. It is us. That means it is driven by human emissions, primarily of carbon dioxide, but as well methane and nitrous oxide. It's bad. We're going to suffer from a number of negative effects from the warming climate, more intense precipitation cycles and greater heat waves and sea level rise and forest fires primarily. And there's hope. Because it is human caused, that does mean that our actions today can make a difference as to how bad it gets. Originally, this presentation was a two-parter where I've got about half an hour on the Inflation Reduction Act and about half an hour on utility scale solar, since one of the things that we did in our chapter in Indiana was advocate for utility scale solar. We ultimately lost that fight at the county level, but I brought this presentation on the road to a few other counties where they've continued to push back. Today, we're going to be focusing on the Inflation Reduction Act portion. So the Inflation Reduction Act is a big deal. It is, in terms of dollars invested, the greatest climate bill ever passed by any country, anywhere, ever. And it's going to help get us to 40% cut in our GHGs by 2030. So here is a line graph of our GHG emissions to date up through 2022. This might actually be through 2021. We're somewhere in the mid 5 billion ton range in the United States, which is somewhere around 16 tons a person. If we just continued sort of doing what we're doing, phasing down coal, slowly rolling out more wind and solar, most analysts projected somewhere in the range of about a 27% cut from the 2005 baseline. Why from the 2005 baseline? That is the agreed upon year for climate commitment baselines in the Paris Agreement. It's also pretty close to when our emissions as a country peaked. We peaked in 2007, as you can see on the chart, slightly above the 2005 levels. But since then, we've come down, double-digit percents. And if we kept doing what we're doing, we'd be at 27%. However, the Inflation Reduction Act, with its policies, projected to bring us down to about 40%. So that's another 13% off of our emissions. Unfortunately, the Paris target is for 50% cut by 2030. So we're still 10 points short. So there is still more to go, more to do. That will have to be driven by states and the private sector. And if we're lucky, eventually by additional federal policy. So it's not just about greenhouse gas emissions either. The Inflation Reduction Act also had a number of other benefits. When you decrease your greenhouse gas emissions, you're primarily doing that by burning less stuff, which also means that you're emitting fewer air pollutants. So some modeling suggests that we could save 180,000 American lives over the course of 8 years just from reduced air pollutants. Because every study you look at air pollution, it's like, yeah, it's worse for human health than we thought. It's tied to asthma, heart disease, stroke, cancer, lung disease, Alzheimer's, other forms of dementia, and even things like vision loss and depression. So air pollution is a nasty thing to have to live with, and this is going to help us reduce that. Also, the plants don't like it either. Ozone, nitrous oxide, things like that are bad for crop yields. Studies done on when coal plants have phased out have shown a bump of anywhere from like 2 to 7% in crop yields. So we're looking at about $400 million per year in improved crop yields from lower pollutants. And there's also monetary savings because a lot of what the Inflation Reduction Act does is make clean energy and clean energy technology cheaper. So you could be saving $500 a year in fuel costs as you switch to EV. You could be saving $200 a year on electricity bills versus the base case, because a lot of what the Inflation Reduction Act does is incentivize more clean, low-cost electricity. There's also going to be the rebates and the tax credits for the appliances directly in your home. And we'll also fight fossil fuel-driven inflation. There's only so many fossil fuels in the ground. As we use them up, they're only going to ultimately go in one direction, and that is up. So the less we rely on fossil fuels, the less we are tied to their costs and their inflation. At the time I first put this presentation together, it was in 2022, and things were really going off the wall because of the invasion of Ukraine. So why do you call it the Inflation Reduction Act? Well, one reason was at the time, we were experiencing a ton of inflation related directly to fossil fuels. If you look at the price of oil, as well as the price of gas, and when I say gas, I don't mean gasoline, I mean natural gas, like what fuels your furnace or your water heater, if you have that form of heating. And those prices both went through the roof, driving up energy costs. So if we reduce our reliance on those fuels, we can reduce the inflation that we experience for them. But also, more importantly, climate change is actually a huge driver of inflation and the rising cost of living itself. I started keeping a thread on Twitter of article after article of the many, many products, commodities, and services that climate change was contributing to an increase in the cost of. So because of things like increasing temperatures, floods, droughts, fires, your infrastructure, your agriculture, your forestry is all suffering from real costs. So anything from lumber to rice to chocolate to coffee to wheat, sugar, soybeans, chili peppers, all affected, all experiencing jolts in price or shortages over the last couple of years, largely because of droughts, which in some cases have been unprecedented. And beyond that, it's going to affect, even used cars as hurricanes wipe out a bunch of cars in Houston or Miami. It's affecting prices of things like semiconductors, as a drought in Taiwan is forcing the plant to shut down because they can't get enough cooling water for either them or their power plant. Shipping costs going up because of everything from the Panama Canal to the Mississippi River, suffering from a lack of water to float barges adequately. Electricity costs have gone up. This was an example from France, where their low river levels were causing them to shut down a lot of their clean nuclear plants. Also seeing that for hydroelectricity, and a lot of stuff that was being manufactured in China when they had a huge drought in 2022. Even the stuff that we need for the clean energy transition, like polysilicon for our solar panels and lithium for ion batteries, all being held up. Your home insurance premiums, I imagine, have also gone up, and in some areas more than others, particularly California and Florida, due to fires and floods. And then your tax dollars also going increasingly to rebuilding infrastructure that gets destroyed or providing disaster relief for struck areas. So climate change isn't just for environmental tree hugger greenies. It's for everyone that likes to eat food or live indoors and doesn't want to pay out the nose to continue to do those things. How does the IRA help achieve these greenhouse gas and pollution reductions? Through two major mechanisms. There's one major stick, a methane pollution fee, which was briefly implemented and then rolled back. And now there's going to be some court particularities around how that actually gets rolled out. But this would place a fine on oil and gas producers for any methane that leaks out of their pipes and enters the atmosphere. So it's not a fee on methane production, it is a fee on methane leakage. Methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. Over a 20-year period, it traps about 84 times as much heat per ton as carbon dioxide does. So it's very powerful, very potent, and cutting it in the near term is very important to keeping within our climate goals. So that's a key tool. But most of the rest of the bill is about carrots. So incentives and finance mechanisms. So tax credits, financing programs, grants that revolve around two major themes. And I would say one major theme is make clean energy cheap, and the other is invest in the United States. So it was really a hybrid of environmental policy and industrial policy. So where are these investments going? Primarily investing in industry. The largest single wedge of the Inflation Reduction Act spending is in the clean electricity tax credits. So these are things that would provide 30% or upwards tax credits to invest in the production of wind, solar, geothermal, nuclear, hydro, any emissions-free technology that can produce electricity. The goal is hopefully up to 85% of electricity by 2030 could be from clean sources. When this started, we were at 40, and I think we were bumping up to, I want to say 48 as of last year. I'd have to check on that. Electric transport. So there are a lot of credits for electric vehicles, both private personal use and commercial use, and manufacturing. A lot of tax credits for manufacturing stuff, especially here in the US or with our friends, our allied nations. So batteries, wind turbine components, solar panels, we want to make more of that. We want to make that here in the US if at all possible. Financing. The Loans Program Office and the Department of Energy was given an additional $250 billion in loan authorities. This is a very powerful office that actually helped drive the launch of Tesla back in the early days and has driven many jobs and industries by providing commercial debt to sort of early stage clean energy companies. And then directly into research through $2 billion for our national labs. So I did have a list of companies that had already announced IRA-related investments. There's hundreds of billions of dollars that was already announced for companies that wanted to build in the US. Unfortunately, I think even in just the last couple of months, about $8 billion of that has been canceled due to some changing policies of the new administration. But a lot of this centers around EVs and batteries for those EVs. Many companies announcing production primarily in the battery belt range of states from Michigan down to Georgia. More solar production, more processing and mining of lithium. Some announcements from nuclear companies that want to expand their footprint as well. Hydrogen electrolyzers, utility structures. One is in my hometown, Crawfordsville. Nucor Steel announced that they were expanding their business for utility structures. So like the big pylons that you see holding up our power lines, as well as the housing and steel needed for things like EV chargers. Wind, heat pumps, geothermal, all of these techs have either expanded or brought forward or brought new investment into the US because of this bill. And there's a great website out there. A guy named Jack Conness does one, and there's another website that tracks it as well. So you can see where a lot of those investment dollars have been mapped out and the many manufacturing or electricity production sites scaled by size across the map here. Beyond industry, there's also investments in cities. There's energy efficiency credits and rebates for businesses, schools, churches, government buildings. I do want to point out for the first time ever, a very critical part of the Inflation Reduction Act is it made a lot of these tax credits, which have existed in some form or another for many years, available to entities that don't owe taxes. So that includes state and local governments, that includes schools, that includes nonprofits and houses of worship. So if you put solar panels on a nonprofit, which I have experience helping some in my town do, you can get 30% back from the federal government, even if you don't owe taxes normally. Same goes for schools. Same goes if your town wants to put some on the library or the city hall. Also goes for Indian tribes. So these credits became available to a whole new tranche of people that never had access to those funds before. There are rebates for zero emissions garbage trucks and buses. There are credits for installing EV chargers, and there's even grants for some urban forestry, which is important to help manage things like air pollution and heat island effect. The rural communities aren't left out. The rural communities and our farms and forests are also going to benefit. Primarily, rural communities are going to benefit because of the clean energy investments. As we build wind and solar, those have to go in a place where you have the land to do it. They do take up quite a bit of space. So that is going to result in a lot of investment in places where they have lots of land, wind, and sunshine, so they can sell their power to the rest of the country. And that is going to result in property taxes directly into their coffers. There's also direct grants, loans, and credits for rural electric co-ops that can be taken advantage of. I believe that was about $9 billion that was made available for them directly. For farms, there is about $20 billion in various conservation programs, and also drought and mitigation and resilience programs. Forests, there were more investments in smart forest management, and also for our firefighters and wildfires, which, as we see more wildfires pop up because of more intense weather cycles, that's something that we're going to have to invest in to just prevent damage, unfortunately. Investments for our disadvantaged communities. There are grants for community-led projects, which are a little bit open-ended. Communities could apply. Grants for equitable transportation access. So maybe your city was cut in half back in the 60s or 70s by a big interstate highway. You could get a grant to help mitigate the impacts of that, maybe get the bus stops in the right places to serve those communities. Reduce pollution at ports. This is a big one because you have a lot of trucks, a lot of ships, a lot of trains, a lot of yard equipment to handle all the goods. So ports are often a very intensely concentrated source of air pollution. So if we can electrify those trucks that are on site, if we can get things like hookups for the ships that are out at sea, so they don't have to be running their diesel engines all the time, that could really improve the air quality in port areas. And also some grants for energy efficient, affordable housing. There's also $27 billion made in 3 separate buckets in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. This is mainly seed money for different programs that you might call green banks. They provide credit and lending to everyone from an individual who needs a heat pump and a low-cost loan to put it in, to businesses and community organizations that also want to pursue clean energy. So a lot of the financial rub with clean energy is you save money in the long term because you don't have to buy fuel anymore, but you do have to come up with the capital up front often. So providing these finance mechanisms help bridge the gap for a lot of those users. There's also a lot of business set-asides, particularly in the tax credits. One example is that the baseline tax credit for putting in solar panels is 30%. And I'm just talking about the business one, not the household one. But if you put it in an energy community, which is designated as like, hey, their employment relies a lot on a coal mine or a coal plant or the oil and gas business, and they need help transitioning, you get like a 10% adder. So now it's 40%. You can also get another adder if it's in a designated low income area or a low income project. So there are intentionally dollars in there to sort of sweeten the deal for communities that may need a little bit more investment. And now we're going to talk about investments in households. This is where we're going to spend most of our time today because it's going to be the stuff that is most relevant to the most people. So there are both rebate and tax credit programs for homeowners. New York was actually the first state to get the rebate part of the equation set up, because the way that the rebates were done was the federal government said we're going to make a certain amount of money available for rebates, and then we're going to send it to the states, and the states have to figure out their program for how people sign up, how it gets distributed. And that is a fixed amount. So there's up to $14,000 in rebates, but you have to have the income level to qualify for your area. And if you want to know if you qualify and what you might qualify for, I highly recommend going to rewiringamerica.org and looking at their IRA savings calculator. If you put in your income and zip code, they can tell you what you might qualify for. If you want to go straight to the source, energy.gov/save will give you a list of all the credits and rebates that you could possibly have. If you want to look to see if there's anything else out there, a good resource to look at is desireusa.org. That's DSIREUSA.org. That is the database for state incentives for renewables and energy efficiency. So maybe beyond just the IRA programs, you might see like, does the state have anything else? Is there a state tax credit, which in New York there often is? Or maybe there's a rebate available through my utility, which sometimes there is for that as well. I took advantage of that several years ago when I sealed my air ducts. I got $300 back for my gas utility. And then here in New York, a great resource to look at is NYSERDA. Their nyserda.ny.gov, put energy to work, energy program and incentives. That is a great link to look at as well. So what kind of rebates and tax credits are available? As I mentioned, there are both tax credits and rebates, and the rebates are upfront, which is nice, but you do have to be qualified. Your income has to be below a certain level, which I want to say is like 80% of the median in your area. And then there's the tax credits. The tax credits anyone can qualify for, but you won't receive the payment until you file your taxes next year and claim the credit. And New York also has incentives as well beyond what is in the middle of this picture. So all the New York incentives that I could find, I tried to put on the side here in the yellow boxes. So this is a watercolor by a woman named Nicole Kellner. She actually has a number of climate-themed watercolors. It's great. She just made a pictorial representation of a house and all the goodies that you could get a tax credit or a rebate on. So I'm going to start from the top. Rooftop solar, 30% tax credit. And then in New York, on your state taxes, you can get a 25% tax credit up to $5,000. So there's a maximum on the size of the solar installation that you can put in. You can't get more than 5,000 back from New York State. So rooftop solar can be one of the higher ticket items on here. Depending on how big your installation is, you may have to ask yourself, like, wait, can I even use a 30% tax credit all in 1 year? Maybe you're retired and you have the money for the system, but you don't necessarily have the income to claim the taxes on. I will tell you that the tax credit is not fully refundable, so you cannot lower your tax liability below $0. It doesn't work that way. But what you are allowed to do with the rooftop solar tax credit is you can spread it out over 2 or more years. On the other side of the house here, they're pointing at the attic, which is a key place in your house to insulate. Basic weatherization. So insulation, and even things like doors and windows. I got over 500 back when I replaced a couple windows in my house a couple years ago. So there's up to a $1,600 upfront discount, and the upfront discount here is the same as what I've been calling a rebate, as well as up to a $1,200 tax credit. I believe on Windows specifically, the cap was $600, but that cap also resets every year. So if you want, you could do enough work this year to get the $1,200 tax credit, and then you could do more work next year to get the $1,200 tax credit again. It all depends on how much work you have to do on your home. I have a home from like 1910, so it's quite a lot. There's also the New York Comfort Home program that applies to insulation. And that program is a little more complex, but you could get rebates anywhere from $1,600 to $4,000 from New York State as well. Moving down, I don't know why she put this one in the bathroom, but the electric wiring, if you need to upgrade the electric wiring in your house so it is ready for electrification. That could be up to a $2,500 rebate if you qualify for the income-based rebates. This one is also very closely related to this one in the garage, electric panel. So there's a separate rebate as well as a tax credit if you need to upgrade your electric panel. We did a bit of an overhaul in 2020, and we did replace our decades-old electric panel with a new one with all of the new circuit breakers. So that was nice as well. The most complicated rebate on here, I'm not sure a whole lot of people are going to even qualify for this one, but whole home energy reduction. If your contractor knows what they're doing and you can team up with them to say, okay, I want you to look at my whole home and say, like, how much energy can you save if you do this, that, and the other thing? If you have the right situation, both in terms of your house and in terms of your income for qualifying for the rebate, that could be up to $4,000 as sort of just like a whole home rebate. That is the rebate here that I'm least sure how it actually works. And you'll definitely want a qualified contractor to help you know if you're qualified for that one. Moving down to the garage, electric vehicle. There is a $7,500 tax credit for new electric vehicles. If you want to know what vehicles still qualify, go to fueleconomy.gov. It's only going to be vehicles that are manufactured in the US. And if it's a car, it has to be like 50,000 or less. And if it's SUV, it has to be like 80,000 or less. There's also up to $2,000 drive clean rebate for your New York taxes. I believe they actually apply that one at the dealership. And there's a much wider range of models that qualify for that one. I purchased a car in November, and it did not qualify for the federal tax credit, but I believe it did qualify for $500 on the New York Drive Clean. There's also a tax credit for used EVs, which doesn't appear here, probably because it's actually pretty hard to qualify for the used EV tax credit. There is both sort of like an income maximum and an income minimum on that one. You can't be over a certain level, but if you make less than a certain level, it also doesn't make sense to even qualify for that one. So they really threaded the needle on the used EV tax credit, but I think for certain people that can be worth up to $4,000. Moving on to the kitchen, induction stoves. So induction stoves are sort of the hot new thing. In my house back in Indiana, we just have a regular electric cooktop, something that takes 18 minutes to boil water. An induction cooktop, though, is something that works using the power of electromagnets. So it actually turns your pan into the heating element. And it is super efficient, super easy to clean, very safe because the surface doesn't even heat up. The only thing that heats up is the pan. And I have a little single burner induction unit that I bought for about $70 that just plugs into the wall. So it has about half the power of like a full size induction stove, but it boils water about 7 minutes. And if you get a full power like induction range, you can boil water about 2 minutes. So it's really something. And it's also a great way to move off of gas. I know a lot of people prefer gas for various reasons. But the induction stove is not the electric stove that people tend to think of. It's something much better. On the outside, we're talking about heat pumps. So heating and cooling your house. A heat pump is just an air conditioner that works in two directions. I have a heat pump at my house. We put it in 2021, and it takes care of all the cooling for the house, as well as all the heating for the house down to about 20 degrees, because at the time, my contractor didn't have a cold climate model available. There is now a cold climate model made by Rheem that I wish I could have, so I could have gone 100% electric on that and killed the furnace. But below 20 degrees, my furnace picks up the slack. And by putting in a heat pump, it's really cut our energy usage because they can be 300% efficient, because a heat pump works with the magic of not producing heat, but moving heat and concentrating it. So you can be more than 300% efficient, which sounds a little bit like black magic. How can you be more than 100% efficient? But there are both tax credits for heat pumps up to $2,000. And if you qualify for the rebates, up to $8,000 upfront rebate. The absolute most efficient way to heat and cool your home is with geothermal. So where the heat pump is not sitting out in the air, but where the coil is actually down underground and exchanging heat with the earth, which is always at a very steady temperature throughout the year. So you can be 400 to 500% efficient with the geothermal system. There's a 30% tax credit if you go geothermal, but geothermal is going to be pretty significantly expensive, especially for a retrofit. If I was building a new house, I would absolutely do geothermal, no question. There are also New York clean heat rebates on heat pumps for an air source heat pump. So the box that sits outside, up to $1,000 per 10,000 BTUs. My heat pump is a 4-ton, so it's 48,000 BTUs. So that would be, $4,000 to $5,000 in New York clean heat rebates. So that could be pretty significant. And the ground source can be up to 1,500 per 10,000 BTUs. So again, for something that would be needed to heat my house, that'd be possibly $6,000 in New York clean heat rebates. I also missed this. There's also an RG&E induction cooktop rebate if you are an RG&E customer for $100. Down to the basement. This is the one that I think is actually the best deal on the whole house. So a heat pump water heater. We already talked a little about heat pumps and how they are, 300% efficient. I have a heat pump water heater in my house as well. It uses less than a third the energy of a gas or standard electric heat pump or water heater. And the cost difference, you might pay $800 for a regular water heater, and you might pay $3,000 for a heat pump water heater. So that is a $2,200 cost difference, but there's a tax credit of up to $2,000, and if you qualify for the rebate, it's up to $1,750. Especially if you are on electric, if you are on an electric water heater, going to a heat pump water heater will slash your bills by a large factor, because electricity in this country costs about 3 times as much as gas, and the heat pump water heater is about 3 times as efficient as a standard water heater. So if you're going from gas to heat pump, the savings isn't really there. It's about equivalent month to month. But if you go from a standard electric to a heat pump water heater, I mean, you're basically throwing money out the window every month that you continue to have a standard electric water heater when you could have had a heat pump. It could be, dozens of dollars every single month. So with this rebate or with this tax credit, the heat pump water heater is going to pay for itself in pretty short order. Finally, there's a heat pump clothes dryer. If you qualify for the rebates, that's up to an $840 upfront discount. The heat pump clothes dryer, one cool thing about it is it doesn't even need a hole to the outside. So again, that's going to help your whole home efficiency, because you get to seal up a hole in your home that was blowing warm air from your dryer outside of your house all winter. And also, heat pump clothes dryer is going to use about a third the energy of a regular dryer. The only real downside with the heat pump dryer, besides the upfront cost, is it will take you longer to dry your clothes. It may take twice as long. So if you're like, I've got 4 kids and I'm doing laundry all the time, maybe a heat pump dryer isn't the right solution for you. But they do work, and they do have these side benefits, like not having to have a hole in your house, and you're using 1/3 as much energy. Also, from New York State, there is a $700 heat pump water heater rebate. So I think if you add up all of the rebates and tax credits from New York State and from the federal government, and possibly even from your utility, you may be able to get a heat pump water heater for the same price, or possibly cheaper than a standard electric water heater, plus the power savings. This slide, I'm sort of taking you through my journey from 2018 to 2023 of streamlining our house. With the exception of the windows that we put in 2023, everything was done before the rebates. So it does amount to something north of $30,000, which I estimate is saving me about $600 a year. So that's like a 50 to 60-year payback, which isn't great. But things like granite countertops never pay back. You never get your money back out of like a granite countertop. Whereas I am benefiting both financially, environmentally, and also just by having a more comfortable, livable home, less drafty, more cozy. So where we started in 2018, if you look at my total usage in kilowatt hours, so I broke down electric versus gas, and gas I translated from therms to kilowatt hours, so I had a common unit that I could use. So from 2018 to 2023, and this red line here, by the way, that is what the average Indiana household uses. So we went from above average to significantly below, 66% reduction in final energy consumption, 87% reduction in gas consumption, because I did shift some consumption from gas to electric as we added the heat pump technology. House is about 110 years old, and we added a baby in 2020, and I started working from home in 2020 as well. So you would expect you added a human and you added being there more during the day, and yet still achieve these cuts. So in 2018, we had our furnace die on us suddenly. It was like a cold December weekend, and we had bought the house about 1 year previous, and it was a 30-year-old furnace, and it just died. So we had it replaced with a high efficiency furnace. If I had been in the house a little bit longer, if I had known more about all this stuff at the time, I was a new homeowner at the time, I would have made a plan and planned ahead. And if I knew everything that I know now, I would have gone with a cold climate heat pump and electrified the whole house in one go. It is very important to plan ahead with things like HVAC upgrades, because oftentimes you are scrambling in an emergency situation. Like, it's 15 degrees out and you have no heat. So you're getting whatever your contractor has in the back of the truck. We did choose the high efficiency option, but again, if I'd owned everything, I would have electrified the whole house and gone cold climate heat pump. So that's just putting in a word for planning ahead. So high efficiency furnace replaced our leakiest windows. One was just not in the frame right, so it was leaking constantly. A couple were just single ply. Single ply windows bleed heat like nothing else. Like it's just a skinny piece of glass between you and the elements. January, we did some duct sealing. We put some insulation in the attic. This way, the warm air doesn't leak out of your ducts as it's trying to deliver it to the rest of your house. Attic insulation is key as well. Heat rises and it's going to escape out the top of your house without proper attic insulation. In September 2020 is when we put in the heat pump water heater. We also added some crawl space insulation. And another bonus of going from gas to heat pump water heater is that it also allowed us to seal up our chimney. The chimney was, a century old. It was crumbling, falling to the ground. It was an entry point for bats. After we had the chimney sealed, we got one more bat and then no more. And we used to get 2 or 3 bats a year. So side benefit to sealing up your chimney, which you may just be using to vent gas currently, is the bats can't get in. Did some weather stripping around the doors and windows. I like to do this in February on like a really cold day, really cold weekend. I'll just go around with the back of my hand on my doors and windows, kind of feel for leaks, feel for air intrusion. Did some minor caulking air sealing. September 2021 is when we put in the heat pump. So again, this took the heating load away from the furnace, does all the heating and cooling down to 20 degrees. At 20 degrees, the furnace kicks in because the heat pump starts to become less efficient, noisier and more expensive to run at colder temperatures. So the furnace is still there to sort of take that really cold weather burden. January 2022, we added an attic radiant barrier. So now my house basically has a space blanket on it, which reflects a lot of heat both into and out of the house, so it doesn't get so piping hot up there in the summer. We added more crawl space insulation. We did more door and window sealing. February to October 2022, I did a long, drawn out, 10-month long DIY process to seal our rim joists. If you have a house with a basement, the rim joist spaces are the space in between your first floor and the brick or concrete or whatever the foundation is of your basement. There's that like 9-inch tall section of wood. In many houses, this is a neglected area for insulation, and it is just a piece of wood, your siding, and the outdoors. Oftentimes, this is also the spot in your house where contractors of various types like to put in holes for your dryer vent, holes for your cable, holes for your electric line, your gas line, water lines, your hose, like all the holes in your house. And oftentimes these holes aren't sealed so tight. So I would say attic is most important, but probably you might find some quick wins in your rim joists as well. It's definitely worth checking out and doing some sealing there. I was able to DIY this one, though it took me way too long because I had a small child and a bad case of the procrastination. Beyond this, I did some more foam board insulation in the attic. I toyed around with the heat pump settings, said, well, maybe I used to have it on 30 degrees. What if it goes down to 20 degrees? Did some more air sealing, tried rope caulk. And then in May, this is the only time that I was able to take advantage of the IRA incentives for my own house. And that was when I replaced 2 more windows that were single ply. There are no more single ply windows above basement level in my house anymore, which is great. Solar, my house wasn't really suitable for solar. So I decided to make it a philanthropy project. So I called the nonprofit down the street, the Montgomery County Youth Service Bureau, and said, if I put up the money, would you be willing to put solar on your nice flat roof over there? And they said yes. So we put a 10 kilowatt solar system on their roof. That's me standing next to it. And I managed to get a profile in Canary Media, which is a publication focused on the energy transition for it. And then in summer 2022, the Inflation Reduction Act passed. And now nonprofits are able to get 30% back in tax credits. So that enabled me to pitch the project to the Boys and Girls Club. I said, I can't afford to put another solar system under the nonprofit, but I can give you a little bit of money, get some quotes for you, tell you how to get this tax credit from federal government. Do you think you can put the rest of the money together? And they said, yes, this actually sounds like a great idea. I have a background in finance, so I was able to crunch all the numbers for them and what the return for that would be. And after we did the Boys and Girls Club, a friend of mine who's on the board of the Montgomery County Free Clinic came to me and said, can you come talk to me and our executive director about what you did with the Boys and Girls Club? And we did it there too. So between those 3 nonprofits, we brought about 40 kilowatts of solar online in our little town. So beyond the Inflation Reduction Act, what's left to do? State and local implementation. So actually taking advantage of all the credits. And unfortunately, due to the change in administration, there's also been a number of legal challenges and holdups on a lot of the grants, loans, and various programs. Even the FBI was sicked on the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and that's been sort of an unprecedented scandal. But the fight goes on in the courts. A lot of the funds have been re-released. The tax credits are still flowing. Some of that may change with this next budget bill the Congress is considering, though Citizens Climate Lobby is going to work right now trying to lobby Senate Finance Committee members to retain those clean energy tax credits. There's still more to do even after implementing the IRA. As I said, it gets us to a 40% reduction by 2030, but we want a 50% reduction. So what more can we do? A big policy that CCL supports and has supported since its founding is making polluting more expensive. So the IRA made clean energy cheap. Now that's an option. What if we also made it more expensive to pollute? It's currently free to dump all of your carbon dioxide into the sky. This is a problem. We support a policy called carbon fee and dividend, which would find the polluters and return that money to the people. So you can't just dump your CO2 in the sky anymore. We also want to make clean energy easier to build. So there's permitting reform. For example, it could take up to 17 years to build a transmission line in this country. And if we want to electrify everything and build wind and solar in our sun and wind rich regions and move that power to where people live so they can have clean energy, we need to build more transmission lines. That's also policy CCL is fighting for. And we also want to help adapt and draw down. So things like the urban forest that I mentioned earlier, things that will make it easier to live in a more extreme climate, infrastructure that's more resilient to floods or droughts or sea level rise will also need to be built as well to just adapt to the changes that already happened. So thank you so much. I did run a little longer in this section, but we do still have time, I believe. I am willing to take any questions. We can focus on this slide if you like, or any other slide.
So I noticed we have a question in the chat that relates to that map you showed with all the different places.
This one.
Yes. So it looks like New York has the lowest level of all the states listed. Any idea why is the question.
Well, New York has the lowest level out of the top, what, 15 states or so there. So you're like ranked 15th. There are some states that don't have any relevant investments. New York, I believe, did have some investments, even here in Western New York, with a hydrogen company called, is it Plug Power? I believe some of those investments were canceled. There's actually also some battery recycling investments in the Rochester area. So there's not nothing. So there were some things that did not make this tracker's cut as to what they defined as an IRA-related investment. I will say that most of the investments, most of the big dollar investments that have come through are related to the manufacturing of batteries and electric vehicles. So a lot of those investments are going in places where either there is a history of automotive manufacturing or a base of automotive manufacturing currently, so they can connect with their existing supply chains, or a lot of the money is flowing to the Southeast where there is, in some cases, it's a lack of union labor, a lack of cheaper land, faster permitting. So a lot of the investments are for manufacturing, so it's going to the places where people like to manufacture. Yeah, the Northeast didn't exactly earn a huge windfall off of this. A lot of the investments are in this battery belt from Michigan down to Georgia.
So I had a question on the same slide, which is, so most of that is red states.
Yes, it is.
So does that mean that they'll convince our president not to get rid of all this?
That's an excellent question. It actually was part of the strategy to make this a politically durable bill, was that a lot of the investments were going to flow to red states because A, that's where a lot of the manufacturing base was, and so the money would kind of flow there naturally. B, a lot of the red states are also where a lot of the open land is, if you want to build wind and solar specifically. So they kind of knew that that was where a lot of the money was going to go regardless. So by sort of framing this bill as mainly tax credits for businesses, which should appeal to more conservative ideology, whereas climate action doesn't always, and also just based on the location of where it was flowing, that people would like that, even if they didn't necessarily like the idea of doing a lot of aggressive climate action. So if you have been following the news on this closely, there is a group of, it was 21 the last time I looked, but it might be 22 Republican representatives that signed on to a bill. I believe it's called like a letter, not a bill, excuse me. I believe it's called the Garbarino letter because Representative Garbarino was like the first one to circulate around. I believe he is a New York congressman. And they did say like, hey, don't kill the clean energy tax credits. Don't kill the advanced manufacturing tax credits because those things are driving jobs and investment. in our district. So as we do this big budget bill this year, like keep that stuff. That stuff is good. And Citizens Climate Lobby is going back to help try to fight for these clean energy tax credits. And we are definitely carrying a message of economic benefit, both in terms of jobs and new industry, as well as these investments will help keep electricity costs lower because we're essentially incentivizing through tax dollars rather than ratepayer dollars the construction of new fuel-free energy generation, which would help keep wholesale electricity costs down.
So if anyone else has a question, feel free to, maybe you want to take your slide down so I can see everyone at once. I wanted to ask you to talk about your League of Women Voters. What does your, what do you call it? Climate Action Committee?
Yeah, we just call it our climate team, but I guess climate action committee works as well. I think officially everything else is called the committee, so I guess it would be the climate committee.
So what kind of stuff do you do?
Yeah, so I mentioned this at the top, and how a lot of this work in communities in New York might be done by like your color blank green groups. A few things that we did, met with the mayor to get his read on a number of things and advocating with him for a few different things. But talked with the school board and the administrators at the school, let them know about these credits. And especially since we are in an energy community in Crawfordsville and at least 2 of our schools fall within the low income area, they could get not just 30%, but 50% back. So like, hey, I know you guys kind of looked at solar a couple years ago, but the game has changed. The numbers have changed. It's really something you need to look at again, because the federal government's going to pick up like half the tab for doing this. And then you get to benefit for decades of lower electricity prices. So because of the direct pay provisions in the IRA, like it's opened up all of this room for local and state civic action to just suck federal dollars into your schools, into your states, into your cities. So talk to the school about that. Also talk to the school about applying for the clean school bus rebates, which is actually through a different law, but it came out about the same time. So they got rebates for 2 of their electric school buses, and that's still going for 1 or 2 more years. So if you want to go to the EPA and look up clean school bus program. So we got them to apply for that. Also talked to the mayor, the police chief, the sheriff, and the county administrator about electric vehicles and electric police cars specifically. There is not only a credit for individuals for electric cars, there's also a credit for businesses, state and local governments, everybody for electric cars. And there's also an additional credit called the 45W credit for big commercial vehicles. I'm talking like, dump trucks, garbage trucks. So we focus on police vehicles because there was a really good story that made a few different news outlets out of Bargersville, Indiana, where the police chief there had bought 1 Tesla and it went really well and they saved a bunch of money. So they bought another, and over about 3 years, they ended up with like 9 Tesla police cars, and it's saving them something like $80,000 a year in fuel and maintenance. And they also had a number of very positive testimonials just in the experience of owning them and driving them, well, not from the various officers. So like, hey, look, this is a chance to expand your budget and not waste money on gasoline. Like you could be doing more good things with that funding. The efforts to put solar panels on 3 nonprofits that I mentioned, a lot of that was done under the auspices of the climate team. Not only were those the 3 nonprofits that you saw there, but we also did a forum for local nonprofits, which was mainly houses of worship that showed up to this one. again, sort of telling them about like, hey, you can go solar. I don't know if any of them went through with that, but we pitched them all. We pitched the library, we pitched like a local nonprofit events hall. So we also brought to town, this one kind of fell into my lap. There's a group called Solar United Neighbors. They're in like 14 states. I don't know if they're in New York, but one of the things that they do is they go from like town to town, county to county, running solar buy-in co-ops. So they'll go to a town and be like, hey, we're trying to sign up as many people as we can to go solar. We're going to pick one vendor, and that vendor will knock somewhere 10-15% off the price if everybody goes in at once, and we'll just knock out all the people that signed up in quick fashion. So essentially, they're kind of doing advanced marketing for a solar installer, and then all the people in the buy-in co-op kind of help pick the installer. So we got not only the free clinic, but I want to say like a dozen other people signed in Crawfordsville, which is a town of only 16,000 people, for this co-op. And I think at least 6 households went all the way to completion through it. So we helped market that. One day I was going through our local museum, and I noticed that all the little spotlights that they had in the exhibits, there's like 20 on the first floor and 20 on the second floor. They were all very hot bulbs, halogen bulbs. So for a couple $100, I helped them replace all their bulbs. And the payback on that is only like a year, because LEDs are just so ridiculously efficient compared to halogens. And when I did the math on how much power they would save, it was something like half a household worth of electricity. So that was a really quick one.
So essentially, you're doing all the research that someone would need to do if they thought they should do something to cut something. Like, I mean, research is hard to do. It's that's a real value add that you're doing for your
Yeah.
community.
So I would say it was a combination of, and the piece I haven't mentioned yet, I think I mentioned earlier, was advocating for utility scale solar in our county,
Mm-hmm.
because there was a small group of people who are, when they found out that 200 megawatts of solar was coming to our county, they sort of agitated against it. So we provided sort of a counter voice to that. Now, unfortunately, the county commissioners listened to the opponents, and they did end up passing a restrictive ordinance, and that project was canceled. But I do think that that is very important work. That is one thing that you could do under the auspices of LWE, and is what we did in Montgomery County. I also then took that presentation to the county north of us, to another county by Kokomo, Indiana, remotely, and then also the people in Delaware County over in Muncie, Indiana, asked for me to actually come and drive like the 2 hours to give this presentation, because they were actively fighting against a moratorium in their county, and they actually pushed back and got enough people to talk to the commissioners and outnumbered the opponents, and they got the moratorium lifted. So there's an organization called Green Light America that's trying to sort of like bootstrap this up across the nation now, because so many of these fights to get wind, solar, batteries actually built are at like the county by county level. And if you do a poll, like 70 to 80% of people would say, yeah, sure. I mean, you can build wind and solar. That's cool. Like, we get more money for our schools, and like, doesn't bother me. But in any county, you'll find 12 people, 20 people who are very angry about the idea. And when the county does these meetings, it's only the angry people that show up.
Mm-hmm.
People who feel neutral to good about it don't necessarily pencil in their calendar to show up at 8:30 on a Monday morning or 4:30 on a Wednesday afternoon to try to make these meetings. So that was another important aspect. So it's a little bit of philanthropy, it was a little bit of research, there's a little bit of advocacy, and it was a little bit of nudging our state and local units of government to say like, hey, did you know that there's all these goodies for you? Which is one of the things I really love about the Inflation Reduction Act, is it sort of changed my role as an advocate from saying, we've got a big problem and we got to have policy to fight this problem, to, hey, I've got goodies for you. Would you like
That's
to
pretty
talk to me about these
different.
goodies?
That's more fun.
Yeah. And it's been pretty wonderful to talk to people about goodies instead of like gloom and doom.
So another thing I keep hearing about is like there's so much wind and solar that then can't get hooked into the grid for reasons that I'm a little vague on.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that? And is there a role for the leagues in doing anything about that?
So are you talking about like interconnection queues? Does that
Yeah.
ring a bell? Yeah. Okay. Um, so not only does the wind and solar have to get built, but it has to get connected. And there's sort of multiple aspects of that connection. One aspect of that connection is sometimes you just have to build the transmission line. And there were a couple of cases out west where like there's this big line from Wyoming to California, and there's another big line from like New Mexico to California. And they wanted to build these big parks, but it took 17 years. It was about 17 years in both cases to get a transmission line built. So that's one aspect of it. It's like sometimes it just takes forever to build the lines to connect things. And that is partially just due to a snarl of permitting processes. And we haven't really cleared the ground for permitting for transmission lines like we have for pipelines. Because a pipeline, FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, has backstop siting authority to say, like, we approve this pipeline across all these states. They do not have that authority for transmission lines for some weird legacy reason. The transmission lines people just didn't have as good lobbyists as the gas people, I guess. So that's one thing that we'd like to see fixed. The other aspect of actually getting them hooked onto the grid is what they call the interconnection queue. And the interconnection queue is managed differently in different regions of the country because our grid is managed different regions of the country. So in New York, you have what they call NYISO, NYISO. That's the New York Independent System Operator. They kind of run your grid. And then in like Pennsylvania and Ohio and Jersey, they have PJM, and that they manage their grid. And in Indiana, we have PJM as well, but we also have MISO, the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, which I actually just applied for a job for when I go back to Indiana, but I don't know if that'll work out. And when a developer says, hey, I want to build a solar project here, it's going to be 200 megawatts, I think, can you approve me? And like, okay, well, we got to do a study on it to make sure that when you hook up, you do not cause failures on the grid, because like you don't want people breaking the electric grid. You want to make sure that you've got the right voltage support, you've got the right power flow, that everything is still going to work and nothing's going to crash when you hook up this new project. Part of the problem is people try to build more projects is they don't necessarily know which project's going to work out in the queue. And they don't necessarily know what projects are going to work out for permitting, because maybe the county government's going to sink their project. So they might do what's called speculative requests. They're like, I got a project here, I got a project here, I got a project here. Can you approve any of those? And then they go, well, we got to do the study. So they go do the study. And then they might do this and say, sorry, no dice. Or it might say, oh, or they might have put up like 3 like requests and maybe only one of them was like real. So you have this big feedback where you've got a lot of projects that need to get built. No one's quite sure what's going to get built. So the backlog kind of multiplies. So that's one problem. And another problem is that oftentimes the builder of the project, they're responsible for paying the costs to hook their project up to the grid. So like, okay, you can build your solar panels, but first we're going to need to do a grid upgrade here. We need to tie in an extra capacitor, an extra substation, and an extra line here to make that all work. And if you pay for that, we can get you hooked up. Like, that's way too expensive for me. And you know what? That's not fair, because everybody's going to benefit from this grid upgrade. Everyone who uses the grid is going to benefit from the grid upgrade. But just because I'm the guy who showed up in line right here, I have to pay for it. So then they go, sorry, and they back out. And then you have to do the power studies all over again. So the way that the costs are allocated, the complexity of doing these studies, the explosion in the number of projects, which creates an even bigger explosion in the number of applications, it's all kind of happening at the same time. And different regions are struggling with it more than other regions. PJM, I believe, is currently struggling the most, so much that they even suggested a 2-year moratorium on hookup applications. Like, we got to clear the backlog we got now. And people are like, that's messed up. You can't just do like a huge moratorium. Down in Texas, they have their own grid operator called ERCOT, and they do something called connect and manage, which basically means we'll let you hook up, we'll figure it out, but you may not actually get to be online all the time until we figure it out. So we're just going to hook you up and then we'll kind of manage around whatever your situation is. But be warned, you're not going to be able to sell power necessarily every day.
Wow.
So some people think that more regions should move to connect and manage because in ERCOT, they've been able to build fast. And some other people like that's kind of reckless. So it's a bit of a mess and it goes beyond just state policy. These grid operators also kind of have to get their stuff together. And it is complicated too, because a lot of these grid operators are operating across more than one state and they're serving multiple utilities. So there's not like one policy that can be passed at any one state house just to tell PGM to fix what they're doing.
So they're not run by the feds in any way, or
They are responsible and regulated by FERC at the federal level.
oh,
Yeah, so FERC will pass various regulations that they have to follow. They did do an order recently that sort of pointed to more long-term planning. So there is an argument that like we need to socialize the cost more so that it's not one developer bearing the whole cost, which causes them to back out. There's also an argument you need to do more planning. So you're not like doing this endless study. You could do planning and say, like, here's like 20 spots where you guys could go build up to a certain size. Go pick a spot instead of just like waiting for a developer to come to you. So there are people working on this. There are people thinking about different ways to do it. FERC has taken some steps, but it's not a solved problem by any means.
So everything I know about FERC makes me discouraged just to hear that they're the ones in charge. I think of them as let's build pipelines. But
Yeah, they regulate the pipeline system and they regulate the electricity system. So
okay. All right. Let me give everyone else another chance to ask questions if anyone's got any. And I don't
hopefully I
see.
didn't knock everybody out with my deep grid nerdery.
No, I think it was a great overview of there is room to do a lot of positive stuff right now, and it's really easy for us who read too much news to just get discouraged and think the whole world is going down the tubes. So I think this is a great thing for us to hear about.
Yeah, I mean, then there's definitely room for small groups of people and in local areas to make a difference. I mean, I talked about advocating against the opponents. So make sure it's not just the angry people showing up. Make sure that there's proponents showing up if there's a fight in your area. And then just I hope most of the IRA survives this year because it is also a great tool to just spread the word about and not just to individuals, but also to your local government. So if you have connections at your school boards, your local governments, like, hey, I think you could save a boatload of money if you do this stuff.
Yeah. So the law could be changed till the end of the year. So I'm just trying to think what time period can we say you better hurry and get it before?
So the IRA is the law of the land currently. There have been problems with the executive branch overreaching and in most cases getting their hands slapped back by the courts. That's a whole thing, but it's still the law of the land and the tax credits haven't really been challenged. So those are still legit, but the Congress is currently looking at a budget that may affect those tax credits. I would almost guarantee that they are not going to mess with anything tax credit wise for 2025. It will probably be, this will take effect at 2026 at the earliest, because it's just way too much of a freaking mess to try to change tax law mid-year. So I would bet, I can't guarantee that the credits will be available through the rest of this year. I would not bet that any one piece of it would still be available next year. It might be, it might not.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, John, for being with us tonight and for all the
Thanks.
great work you do. And I'm glad to hear you're on the Indiana board. Yeah, I've been getting to know the state and national levels of the league better in the last couple of years, and
Great.
it makes me feel really happy to be part of a big, you know, not just a small fish in a small pond, but a small fish in a big pond.
I saw someone ask for the presentation. I will send the PowerPoint to Barbara so she can share it.
Yeah, we've also been recording, so
Oh, great.
I'll put it on our YouTube channel within the next couple of days. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you
Uh,
so much for hosting me.
yeah.